So people talk all the time about how much of a numbers game online dating is. Well, someone sent me a link to this post on Reddit that's actually pretty shocking. And when I say it's pretty shocking, I mean it's actually shocking to everybody. It is actually a really honest, accurate, and raw portrayal of Tinder, and I think there's a lot we can learn from it. So let's dig into it. So the post itself is called "Closing My 9-Year-Old Tinder Account After Finding the Love of My Life. Happy to Answer Questions, smiley face." Right, so the guy's clearly happy, and the guy's clearly like showing off and saying, look, I did it, guys. I'm a winner at this. I can help you guys out. I can be your guidepost. So looks like the guy did very, very well. But then when you start looking at his numbers, it looks a little more depressing perhaps as we go top of funnel down. So it starts off with you swiped 413,440 times. And you go, what the f***? That is a lot of swipes, my God. If you think about it over a 9-year period, it's actually not that much per day. We'll get into exactly how much per day it is in a little bit, but it is still a lot of total swipes. It seems like a tremendous, tremendous volume of swipes. It's crazy to think about swiping that many times cumulatively. But he broke his numbers down very, very well and very detailed. So the next thing you might think is this guy's absolutely insane. How did he keep track of all these stats, especially this many swipes? Now, he's not quite that insane. It's actually true that you can get your data from Tinder. You can request it for various reasons. So I'm sure that most of this came from Tinder. The bottom stuff about how many dates he went on, the results of the dates, obviously he would have had to compile that himself. So he was tracking a little bit insanely, but not like he was like making a swipe and then making a tick mark and making a swipe and making a tick mark. It wasn't quite that insane. So just take that into account. But let's look at his actual swiping. His right swipes, 298,696. Left swipes, 114,748. So he's not being that selective. He is swiping right on 2/3 of women. That is a lot. Now, it's not as crazy a strategy as the old strategy that people used to do, which was automatically right swiping. I even know people who wrote algorithms back in the day to auto right swipe on everybody. And by the way, that's a terrible strategy nowadays. It used to actually work very well back in the day, but nowadays the algorithm definitely punishes you for that. And I know that from my own experience, anecdotally. I also know it from logic, and I know it from many other students I've had who are auto right swiping. I told them to stop, and they started swiping right far less often, but getting far better results by swiping selectively. So this guy's actually honestly probably swiping right too often for best results, and he's also probably getting a lot of his matches with not the most attractive girls, simply because just demographically 2/3 of the girls on Tinder cannot be hot. It's just not feasible that that's the case. And now we get to the depressing stat that shocks most men, but doesn't shock most men who have been on Tinder. No match, 291,288. Match, 7,408. That is a pretty dismal ratio. And I've looked in the comments here, I think people were saying that's like a 2.5% match rate, which actually is not incredibly, insanely terrible, but it does sound pretty damn depressing. So is this good news or bad news? That's an interesting question. It seems really atrocious. On the other hand, just thinking that you can get 7,000 matches by brute force, this guy who has a terrible ratio, he's just honestly putting in the time, and that gets him this many matches. By the way, looking in the comments, some people have broken down the numbers and they figured out he was swiping, I think, 127 times per day, which again sounds like a lot, but it's actually not really that much. If he is swiping right 2 times out of 3, to swipe 127 times, that's going to be less than 30 minutes of swiping a day, right? Which is still a lot, but it's not a ton. You might be able to do that in 15 minutes a day. So think of it this way. He's doing a 15-minute a day investment in his dating life. Maybe let's say he has a 15-minute commute to work. He hops on his bus to work or hops in the taxi to work. He swipes for 15 minutes and that's his dating life handled. That's kind of crazy. Or maybe it's a half an hour. It's actually not that crazy, but it does add up over time. And this does show that being systematic on an app like Tinder or some other online dating app does add up to a lot of positive effort in your favor over time. And the next line here, of his matches, he had 2,200 he chatted with, 5,198 he didn't chat with. So I was thinking a little bit about whether this one's high or low, and I thought about it based on my own experience and based on the experience of some people I know. Primarily lately, I've been using Hinge rather than Tinder, and I know on Hinge this would be very low for me. But that's not a fair comparison, because on Hinge, the way I work, I'm usually messaging someone before matching with them. Like in the process of matching, there's already been a message sent. Or when they match with me, there's already been a message sent more often than not. There's also prompts to use, and so that makes the messaging a lot easier. The match to message on Tinder is much lower, and recalling some of my results and then going through results of people I know that are actually pretty good at game, I believe this is actually not too bad. There is a decent amount of match and not message that happens on Tinder. So this is actually, while it may seem like a bad ratio, it's not that terrible. And certainly looking at the drop-off of the various phases, this is one of the lowest drop-off phases for him. So it certainly can't be that bad overall. So it looks like his first message is probably decent. And that maybe makes sense, right? Maybe he's done a lot of research. He's sent a lot of first messages, and he's probably using the same first messages over and over that have worked. So this seems like a fairly reasonable number, this particular statistic. The next one, however, is bad. He's going from 2,200 chats to 400 dates and 1,810 never met. So this one's not so good. I would say of the girls that are messaging you back actively, you should be getting probably at least a third of them onto a date. Half would be really, really good. Half would be high, like if your text message game is very, very good. But 1 in 5 is not great, but it's not absolutely horrible. Again, this guy probably got a lot of practice over time. He got probably decent at text messaging. He could do better, but it's not completely unreasonable. And let's be a little bit kind and generous and maybe reasonable with him and allow that some of the time maybe he just decided he didn't like the girl. Maybe he just decided this girl's a weirdo. Or maybe it was a situation where the girl lived too far away, he wasn't willing to put in that kind of effort, or who knows what. So some of these may have just been infeasible or may have been his decision as well. So let's take that into account and give him the benefit of the doubt. Okay, so now this next line is where a lot of people get shocked in the other direction. So far, most people that are reading through this, they're like, oh my God, he swiped so many times. Oh my God, he had so many failures. Oh my God, his ratios are so low, that kind of stuff. And then they see the results of all these horrible, horrible ratios, and they see he had casual sex 125 times. And now you get comments in the chat where people are like, oh my God, what an STD risk. What a man whore. What the fuck? He must have 20 million STDs. Like, I can't imagine a body count that high. Which is kind of interesting, right? Because everybody is like shaming him for how bad his game is and how ugly he must be. And yet, at the same time, now everybody's shocked by, oh my God, he slept with so many girls. And this really does show you that if you are willing to put effort into your dating life, if you're willing to put yourself out there, even if your ratios are bad or supposedly bad, then you actually can get a lot of results. And this is true for online dating for sure. If you're willing to play the numbers game, and yes, there is a numbers game, you can get a lot of results from it. It's the same thing from cold approach as well. It's kind of off topic, but if you're willing to do enough approaches, you will find a certain number of girls that are very willing to meet someone and who like your type of guy, right? And so it's funny because everybody laughs at the guy playing the numbers game, but then at the same time, when they see his results, they're like, shocked the other direction. And this is actually kind of the experience I had, again, with cold approach starting out when I was in college, which is I was doing a lot of cold approach, and my friends who knew I was doing approaches kind of laughed at me and scoffed at me. But then when they saw I had a date or two every single weekend, even when I was just starting out and my game wasn't that good, they're like, how the hell are you doing that? And they were jealous of me. So they were simultaneously laughing at me and jealous of me. And I think maybe partly they're laughing at me because they were jealous and it took away some of the hurt. His ratio of casual sex dates and relationships to no spark at first seems a little bit low, and it probably honestly is. Although again, we should account for the fact that sometimes girls don't look like their photos. And already he's swiping pretty liberally at the top of the funnel. And so if he is just going on dates with the girls that will have him to a certain extent, there may be a lot of these that they showed up and they just weren't that attractive or he wasn't attracted to them. There's a lot of those. If he had really good on the date game, he should be probably getting into sex or relationship if he wants to with probably half or more of the girls that he goes on dates with if he had really good game. If he had really, really good game, it might even be 3/4, something like that. Let's allow him the luxury of assuming that at least a decent fraction of these he rejected, because, why not? Let's be generous to him that way. And here's where his stats are definitely a little skewed. Casual sex, 125, relationships, 2. And it does sound like he actually wanted a relationship, because there are guys that in doing online dating are absolutely not looking for a relationship, and that would not be, that shocking. Also, what is a relationship? Does relationship just mean he had sex more than one time, or does relationship mean he went with them for like 6 months or something like that? So we don't know exactly how he defines a relationship. It does seem a little low. It seems like he had a lot of one-night stands that didn't materialize, which is interesting because he seems to have actually been pretty decent on dates. Like, he was relatively charming on dates, and the drop-off after sex was a lot. So maybe we can make some inferences there in terms of like how good he was in bed or how well he kept him around. Or maybe he just, certain girls he was attracted to but didn't see a connection with, I don't know. Relationships too, and then found his love of his life he deleted the app for here now, allegedly. He just deleted it, so who knows. We'll see what pans out from that relationship. but with one of two relationships. So he's not exactly choosing from a ton of abundance there. He's settling down or getting serious or maybe marrying or whatever. His second relationship he's ever had, that's maybe not the best ratio, but you know what? Let's be happy for him. He actually got there. So before we get to the comments, before we get to some of those which are very interesting and worth analyzing in their own regard, what do we see about this guy? The guy put in the work. He did a whole hell of a lot of swiping. And little asterisk, we don't know on here how much he did super liking. We don't know if he had higher memberships and that kind of stuff. And so if he didn't spend any money, then that makes some of these stats that seem very poor up front a lot more reasonable. And probably, to be fair, he was a little bit inefficient. Like, had he had an upgraded membership, maybe he would have had to spend less time swiping or he would have gotten more dates. I would have recommended, if he wasn't doing that, that he do that, because he spent a whole hell of a lot of time, and he probably could have spent a little bit of money to have saved a lot of time. So before we go very briefly into the comments, I mean, there's a lot of them, so we'll just hit on a couple of the high points. What's an overall summary of these numbers? First of all, look, he got the job done, so good for him, right? He found someone he likes, and that's what we're all in this for. And yeah, it took him 9 years, which is a long fucking time. It probably a lot longer than it should have, and he probably did it in not nearly as efficient a way as he could have had he been smarter about it and had better game, which I'll get into in a second. But he did get the job done. So this proves that through brute force, you can actually succeed in your dating life. And if you think to yourself, you know, health, wealth, and relationships are the three pillars of what you want in life, well, he took a decade, but he did get one of those three pillars handled, assuming that we'll take his word that he has found the love of his life and he's good as far as that goes. So in that sense, good for him. Now, he was probably massively inefficient. Had he gotten his profile better and gotten a lot better ratios up front, he could have spent way less time, either far less time swiping or ideally far fewer years. He could have probably achieved this in a year or 2 or 3 and found someone equally as good or better for him instead of 9 years had he had a better profile, or had he had upgraded memberships, or had he had better messaging, all those kind of things. So this guy's not very good at Tinder. Right? He's better than average. These are actually better than average stats for guys, but he's not really anywhere near as good as you could be. He could have been way, way, way more efficient. And my guess is, I don't want to knock on him for whatever, but given how unselective he was throughout this entire funnel, it looks like, I'm guessing his dream girl love of his life probably was just a fairly cute girl that would have him, not the absolute dream girl of, you know, his fantasies. Just a guess, but that's my feel. Overall, this is inspiring and also depressing, but if you are failing at dating and failing at online dating, you should take this as refreshing and reassuring that you can succeed. And it doesn't take that much. If you spent half an hour a day, you could also succeed, because I bet your ratios will be better than this guy's if you put in proper effort. On the other hand, you should also take it as a warning that there are ways to be very efficient and there are ways to be inefficient, and it makes sense to do the work up front to get a good bio, get good photos, work on your messaging, and have a good strategy, because again, this guy spent 9 years of his life doing something that you could have done in far less. As a reference, somebody did the math in the comments. This guy was getting about a date a week. When I went hard on online dating during my launch of my course, Online Dating Academy, I got 10 dates in 7 days. So obviously you can get orders of magnitude more dates than he's getting if you really put in the effort and know what you're doing. Okay, so I'm not gonna spend a lot of time on the comments, just a couple highlights. First, top comment. You know what they say, 400th time is the charm. And he actually means 400,000th time is the charm. So he's making fun of how many times this guy has swiped. But I really like the reply to it. He says, that's where I went wrong. I don't think I've even talked to 400 girls in this life. Yes, that's the point. On the one hand, yes, this guy's ridiculously bad to have these ratios. On the other hand, not talking to enough girls is the single biggest mistake. That is a bigger mistake than having bad game. Bigger mistake than having bad game is not having any game or not making the effort. And just to be fair, this is a huge point, not just for online game, but for game in general. I see lots and lots of guys asking me questions, and if you were to ask them, do you go out, when's the last time you went out, they'd be like, I'll get around to it, or I'm trying to get up the nerve, or I really don't, or something like that, okay? Technique is great, but technique without the effort and the willingness to do it is fucking nothing. Quick sort of positive comment in a way. Said, brother has had 1 casual sex hookup per month for 9 years, unreal track record, LOL. The guy says, corrects him, bro had 1 new casual sex hookup per month for 9 years, let alone the repeat offenses. And that's interesting because, again, this is a guy who essentially people are making fun of because his ratios are so bad. He's having sex once a month, which to me sounds like very little. Sounds like not very often. But for most guys, that's an insane sex life. That's an absolutely insane sex life for the average guy. And how did he get it? Pure effort, okay? So again, it seems like a lot of work up front, but it's not even. He put half an hour a day in, and he basically solved having what most guys would consider to be an insane sex life. Doesn't sound so hard, and this is without a lot of skill. Final comment for perspective, which I think is good. First person says, that looks fucking exhausting, bud. And they're right in the sense of he put in way more effort than he should. But the next comment's good. He says, wake up, copy and paste the same message 400 times, go have sex, sleep. Which is actually also accurate, right? That is also a valid look at what he probably did. So on one hand, it's very hard. On the other hand, it's very easy. It just depends on your perspective. And there are ways to make online dating super efficient. You can copy and paste messages. Better yet, you copy and paste the format of a message or have some standard sort of templates that you use, because pure copy and paste isn't quite as effective. But the point is, it actually can be pretty easy to play these kind of numbers games. You can do a lot of things to make it more efficient. So probably he put in less effort than it might seem to get these results. Okay, so that's the end of my analysis here. What is the major takeaway? The major takeaway is this. Look, there's a lot of ways this guy could have been better at game, but you know what? He achieved what he wanted to achieve. He's happy, and even without skill or without much skill, just through effort. So the point is this, get the skill, absolutely. Watch the videos on this channel, do a lot better ratios than this guy, please. But absolutely there is no excuse for you to not put in the effort and get at least as good an outcome as this guy got. Hopefully you do it in less than 9 years, and hopefully you have fewer swipes on the way to getting there. But regardless, the important thing is getting there. Watch this channel, keep going out, you'll get there.